Well, can you believe it? Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion is officially 10 years old today. That's right, the game was first released on October 24th, 2014. To celebrate, I thought we'd go back in time and take a look at several notable older versions of the game to see how this game changed over time and how it became the masterpiece that it still is today. Now keep in mind that I don't have every single version of the game, but I do have several of them. So let's get started and see where it all began. The very first version of Spooky's was released for free on IndieDB.com 1 week before Halloween in 2014. Sadly, I was unable to acquire this version as it no longer can be found. However, an update was released 8 days later, the day after Halloween, on November 1st, 2014, which is version 1.5. Thankfully, I was able to get my hands on this version, so this will be the one we'll start with. The first thing we noticed in version 1.5 is the different title screen. The main menu music was also different, and the game was called Spooky's House of Jump Scares. As we start the game, there are already several noticeable visual differences from the later versions. The first being that our FOV is much smaller, making it harder to see our surroundings. Next, we notice the HUD is completely different from what we're used to. Our health bar is at the top right corner, where the room counter usually is, and it's displayed in digits rather than a bar. The same goes for our stamina bar as well, and our room counter is in the top left corner. And check out those bland, undetailed flame torches. Yuck. Sadly, these textures weren't changed until a much later version. But it wasn't just the visuals that were different. Audio was quite different too, as our players' running audio sounded like a bouncy ball. Just listen for yourself. Specimen chase themes also played on top of ambience tracks, and at the time, only a few ambience tracks existed. More were added in later versions for a total of 12 that we all know and love today. Specimen 1 also only had a few variants, and with those few variants came only the loudest and most obnoxious jump scare sounds. Only 4 of them would play. One of the biggest problems, though, with this early version was the collision detection. That bloody collision detection. My god, why are the walls rubber cement? Or why are my shoes made of rubber cement? Because this was just unbearable. Sure, you can get stuck on walls sometimes in the current versions too, but that's nothing compared to the stickiness of the walls and the invisible barriers of version 1.5. Thankfully, things were improved in later versions, but these sticky walls made it very challenging to escape from specimens. And speaking of specimens, only specimen 2 through 5 were able to chase in this version, as the game only went up to room 250. Everything after room 250 was just randomized rooms and chases. However, Specimen 9 did exist in the earliest versions, as the endless hallway was able to spawn. Cat DOS was also able to spawn, as well as the brain room. Elevator rooms also looked much different, and all specimens could attack unfairly in the room transitions. But the most interesting and frustrating aspect of this version was Specimen 5. That's right, Specimen 5's chase was changed dramatically in later versions, but this earliest version made her extremely difficult to deal with. First of all, her walking animation was goofy as hell, and she moved even slower than what she currently does. In a sense, this was a good thing, due to what was about to unfold. Also, notice the various sound effects that used to play when Specimen 5 was active. These effects actually sounded pretty cool, and it's a shame many of them were completely scrapped in later versions. And now for the chase. And what the hell, I can't see anything. A heavy fog takes over the screen, and somehow we have to navigate through the rooms with a small FOV and deal with the sticky walls at the same time. Yeah, how about no? Unfortunately, that's exactly how it was. But hey, at least she's slow, right? Not only that, she would cause the player to get stuck and not be able to move at various times throughout the chase. While this was an interesting feature, it was executed horribly in this version due to the poor player performance and how hard it was to see. I do like how Specimen 5 made the room shake as she opened the door, but overall this chase was just more annoying than scary. Thankfully, Akira realized how bad this chase was and improved it greatly in the next version that I'll be showing off in this video. Overall, I wouldn't say this version was bad or anything, but it definitely had some major issues. Of course, you have to remember, this was pretty much the first version of the game, or at least the first version that brought the game into the public eye. So for a first version, it really wasn't that bad, and people caught on to the premise and liked it a lot. The fact the game started doing well at the beginning is the main reason why Akira decided to add on to it and eventually finish it. The game was never meant to be finished, as it was intended to be a joke, but thanks to the excitement from Let's Players, the journey has officially begun. Just over a month later, on December 8th, 2014, the game received its next big update, version 2.3. This was known as the Spooky December update. This version contained a ton of needed fixes and improvements, including a wider FOV and no more sticky rubber cement walls. Yay! That already makes this version a million times better. Also, what? Most importantly though, Kira added a new specimen to this version, and I think we all know who he is. That's right, Ben was born on December 8th, 2014, as this was his first appearance. So he was basically like a Christmas present. This version went up to room 410, and noticed that Kira mentioned that another psychological being was supposed to be in this version, but they ran out of time. This, of course, was referring to Specimen 7. Specimen 7 was then patched into this version a few weeks later around Christmas. This patch went up to room 550. Sadly, I couldn't find version 2.3 or the patch, so I can't show it off. But I can show the next big update, which was released over a month later on January 17th, 2015, known as the Spooky January Update, version 2.5. This update was pretty big, as it went all the way up to room 610, and thankfully fixed Specimen 5's fog. So, let's check out version 2.5. The first thing to notice in version 2.5 is the addition of passwords in the options menu. These passwords still exist in the current version today, but of course room 750 couldn't be accessed yet in this version since it only went up to room 610. These room skips were intended to allow players to get to the new areas faster, rather than having to replay the game all over again. Next, we can see that the HUD has been changed into the one that we're all used to. The room counter is in the top right corner, and our health and stamina are in the top left corner in the form of bars. Although the HUD was actually changed in the patch update of version 2.3 when Specimen 7 was added. Several new rooms were added to the game. The minigame room made its first appearance, along with the Let's Player room and the Foggy Maze room, which appeared way too often in this version. Elevator rooms were changed as well. And as I mentioned, Specimen 5's chase was greatly improved, with the fog effect being made easier. The red visual effect was added to her chase, but that was the only visual effect at the time. The rest of the effects that we all know were added in later versions. But she still had the same goofy walking animation. But at least the days of her being a nightmare were finally over. In fact, her chase was actually quite interesting in this version, in that the red effect would still be present as you enter the next room, making it hard to see where you have to go at times. But she was still way too slow to be any threat. Unless, of course, you get Hall 13. Next up, Specimen 6. While technically this wasn't his first appearance, he was practically unchanged from version 2.3, and he worked quite a bit differently from the current version. In this version, he would always appear behind the entrance door immediately as you enter the room, which I really liked a lot. He was always on the map at all times, even if you didn't see him, which actually made things quite terrifying. You wouldn't always see him, but you would know that you need to keep facing towards the door that you just came out of. But there was a major problem with this chase, and that was him being able to attack in the room transitions, just like everyone else could. Even if you quickly activated the door, he would always attack in the transitions. Therefore, you had to open doors with your back facing them to prevent him from attacking unfairly. attempting to outrun him was impossible. However, you were able to easily cheese him by standing still infinitely while looking at him. He would never disappear and teleport like he does in the current versions, even if you happen to stand idle too long. But overall, I found his chase in the earlier versions to be much scarier, especially due to the fact he would be really close to you if you ran away for even a second or two at the start of the room. It's just a shame he could easily attack in the room transitions. And then came Specimen 7. Like I mentioned earlier, Specimen 7 was first added to the update of version 2.3, and in that particular version, the room counter would stay at 410 for the entire chase, but that was thankfully changed in this version. But the main new addition in version 2.5 was Specimen 8. Dear Lord made his first appearance here, along with the axe. However, the area before Dear Lord's chase didn't even exist at the time, which means Wham didn't exist either. After encountering the violent deer, you were taken straight to the hallway before meeting Specimen 8. This means his chase started in room 558, as opposed to the current room 559. Specimen 8 worked exactly the same way he still does today, but there was a bug in this version that made some of his voice lines sound sped up, which sounded pretty funny. And that's pretty much it for version 2.5 since the game stopped at room 610. But it wasn't long after that some exciting news for the game was announced. Just 2 weeks later, on February 2nd, 2015, it was announced that Spooky's House of Jumpscares was coming to Steam. It was also announced that the game would eventually receive extra content in the form of DLCs and an endless mode, but these wouldn't come until after the base game was finished. The fact Spooky's was coming to Steam was a huge win for developer Akira, thanks to the overwhelming amount of support for the game, and the successful start that the game had after it was first released. Also, notice the screenshots teasing the next area. With Steam Greenlight a success, the next major update was released over a month later on March 12, 2015, known as the Spooky March Update, version 2.7. This update added 2 new specimens and went up to room 760. But one of these 2 new specimens was very special in that it no longer chases in the game, and this is the only version that has its chase. So let's dive in and take a look at version 2.7. The first thing to note is that a pause menu has now been added to the game, the same one that exists today. Before this version, pressing the escape key would just simply close the game, which was extremely annoying. In addition to that, our running audio no longer sounded like a bouncy ball, as more accurate footstep sounds were replaced. Also, Specimen 4 is still the only specimen who does not have her own chase theme, but this was about to change very soon. As we make our way to room 610, we're introduced to Specimen 10's introduction area for the very first time. However, it's not the same chase that we're all used to today. As many of you know, Specimen 10 used to be the giant worm eel that we only now see for a few seconds in the current version. He's now known as the old Specimen 10, as he was replaced by the new Specimen 10 in the very next update. Old Specimen 10 would chase the player just like any other corporeal specimen would, except he was very slow and quite buggy. While his design looked very cool, the chase was really lackluster and didn't have much impact at all, and it just felt like another recycled specimen chase that we've dealt with before. Also, his chase theme was just Specimen 3's, and he would sometimes get stuck outside of the walls. Players then criticized the chase, and Akira quickly realized that it needed to be changed, and so it was in the very next update. But there are a lot of players that do miss Eel Boy's chase, and wish it was still in the game. It really wasn't a bad chase or anything, and I personally think it could have still been in the game somehow. Just give him a buff and his own chase theme, and there you go! Eel Boy would be saved! As we reach room 710, we then encounter the second new specimen in this update, Beef! Specimen 11, aka Beef Demon, was also born in this update, and his chase was pretty much the same as it is now, with just a few minor differences. The problem though was the fact the door frames would still be visible during the chase, despite the doors themselves being invisible, but this was fixed in a future update. Room 750 and Spooky's infinite stamina trick were introduced in this version, but the game only went up to room 760. A message popped up telling the player that the next update would finish the story and levels. But that really wasn't the case, as the next update still only went to room 760. However, the next update was a very special one, as it was the first version released on Steam as early access. On April 24th, Spooky's House of Jump Scares made its way to Steam Early Access, which then made the game even more well-known in the world of indie gaming. This was version 2.7.1. This version added a bunch of new rooms and replaced Specimen 10. While I don't have this particular version, there was a patch update just 2 weeks later, on May 8th, and I do happen to have this patch. Something special only exists in this patch as well, so let's take a look at it now. The May 8th update to the game is a hidden gem in my opinion, because it's the only version to have Specimen 4's old chase theme play during her chase. That's right, Specimen 4 finally had her own chase theme, but it's not the same one that we're used to today. This chase theme was titled Breakfast Was Too Early. It was then replaced with her current chase theme, Breakfast Was Too Late. The reason for the change was just simply because Akira liked the current theme more, therefore it was replaced. Personally, I really loved Breakfast Was Too Early, as the melodic music box aspect of it fits Specimen 4's chase really well. That's why this particular patch version of the game is a hidden gem to me. Moving on to room 210, we notice a new room in Specimen 5's introduction area. However, the room with the fetus still doesn't exist yet. But hey, look at that! Specimen 5 finally has her current walking animation. We no longer can make fun of her goofy walk cycle. Additionally, bedrooms were introduced in the game, along with Spooky Cart in the minigame room. But the most important change in this first Steam version of Spooky's was the fact Specimen 10 was replaced. Eel Boy was replaced with the parasite that we all know and love, or hate. But his chase in this version was extremely easy, as it took him 1,000,000 years to enter each room. Plus, long hauls didn't exist yet until the finished version of the game, so it was super easy to outrun. In fact, there wasn't even a note on the floor yet in room 617 telling the player that you have to keep it close, so Let's Players didn't even realize he had a special mechanic. And that's about it for the May 8th build of the game. This was the final version to end at room 760, as the next version would finish the game and give it an ending, but this wouldn't be for several more months. And so the time finally came. About 2.5 months later, on July 21st, 2015, the finished version of Spooky's was released. This was version 2.8, and the game went up to room 1000 with both endings added to the game. There were 2 patch updates in the days following the release of version 2.8. I happen to have the second of those updates, version 2.8.2, released on July 27th. So let's check it out. As we start a new game, one of the first things we notice is that the flames on the wall have been changed. No more undetailed flame textures that look like they were drawn by a 2-year-old. While the flame texture and animation would remain the same permanently, the torches would eventually change in a later update. Additionally, all of the 11 Specimen 1 variants were now present, but only 8 jump scare sounds played. Chase themes no longer played on top of ambience tracks, and the specimens would now despawn after the exit door is triggered, so they couldn't just continue chasing and attack in the door transitions anymore. This was also the first appearance of both the Five Nights at Freddy's phone room and Howard's room. Specimen 4's old chase theme was now replaced with her current chase theme, Breakfast Was Too Late. New details in rooms were added to room 210, including creatures hitting the gritty underneath the grates, as well as the fetus room, but Specimen 5's chase still only had the one red texture effect that could appear. Specimen 6's chase was now changed. He would spawn in your vicinity 4 seconds after you enter each room, which made him a lot easier to outrun in shorter rooms. This mechanic has stayed the same ever since. A new area was added to Specimen 8's domain, along with Wham! Long hauls were added in the 600s, making Specimen 10's chase more difficult. He enters the room much faster now, and the note explaining how to deal with his chase was added to room 617. There was also a funny glitch where sometimes if you died to a specimen, that specimen's texture would appear on the wall in the elevator after loading up the game again, as if the game was mocking you for dying to it. 2 new specimens were added to this version, Specimen 12 in room 810, has anyone seen my contacts? And Specimen 13 in room 910. The secret Easter egg with Spooky's tragic backstory was also added, and the game now had Specimen 9's boss fight with both good and bad endings included. This would then be the final version of the game for 2015. However, at the very end of the year, on December 30th, the game received its first ever paid DLC, Karamari Hospital. This DLC would introduce several new entities called monsters, and would go a bit further into detail about Spooky's death. The release of this DLC was the perfect way to finish a very successful year for the game. However, some sad news hit the game in May 2016 when Lag Studios, the former name of Kira's dev team, was forced to change the title of the game. The previous summer, Lag Studios received a cease and desist for using the name Spooky's House of Jumpscares because of a mobile developer company in Germany called Spooky House Studios, who were trying to get the trademark for Spooky House. Because Spooky's was a free game aside from the paid DLC, Lag Studios sadly didn't have enough money to start a legal battle to keep the name Spooky's House of Jumpscares. Therefore, they had to change the title to Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion, which is what we all know the game as now. But as a way of protesting, the new title of the game was just taped over the original title, and occasionally other random titles will appear as a joke. About 6 weeks after the game's name was changed, on July 4th, 2016, Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion received its next major update, which added an endless mode to the game. This endless mode contained new Specimen 1 variants and more jumpscare sounds, along with new room layouts and wall textures. New story notes were added, but most importantly of all, there were 10 new chases, exclusive to this mode. Several of the Karamari Hospital monsters were given their own chases, as well as a second form for Specimen 4. 5 brand new exclusive specimens were also added, known as Unknown Specimens. The addition of Endless Mode gave the game more to discover, and gave players a challenge to see how far they could go without dying, since dying in Endless Mode completely erases your score. Additionally, the texture of the torches on the wall was changed, while the flame texture remained the same. The door frame textures were also changed. All of the remaining visual effects were added to Specimen 5's chase, and she was finally given her own death scene. Before this version, she never even had one. The Sunshine Academy minigame was also added to the Karamari Hospital DLC in this update. And that pretty much about covers it. Version 3.0.1 is pretty much the finalized version of the game, although there would be a few more versions to follow, but those wouldn't happen for several more years. Akira then took a break from Spooky's and started working on their next big project, which would end up being another horror game called Lost in Vivo. So that was it for the OG version of the game for the time being, as a brand new version of Spooky's was being developed and would soon be released early that following year. With Akira working hard on Lost in Vivo, a 2-person development team by the name of Albino Moose Games released a totally new version of Spooky's called Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion HD Renovation. One of the developers from Lag Studio, Sheena, was part of the team, and on March 1st, 2017, HD Renovation was officially released. This version would be made in Unity instead of GameMaker, and nearly every specimen would be given a 3D model and eventually new animations. Just like with the OG version, HD Renovation also has had a huge development history, but sadly I don't have access to the older versions yet, so that'll have to be saved for another time. But HD Renovation definitely helped to bring Spooky's back into the public eye once again, and the game is still receiving updates even today. While HD Renovation would be receiving updates over the course of the next several years, the OG version remained untouched all the way through the end of September 2020. But on October 2nd, 2020, Akira released their second and final DLC for Spookies called The Dollhouse. It was actually delayed by one day because of illness. This DLC would ultimately finish the story and reveal the truth of how Spooky was killed on that tragic Halloween night, and she would then be reunited with her parents in the afterlife. This would be the end of the story with Spooky's lore, and no more DLCs were planned for the game. Along with the DLC came the first update the OG version had seen in about 4 years, version 3.0.2. This update fixed some player movements and adjusted the credits of the base game. Indeed, the game now felt a lot easier to run through, as the collision detection was smoothed out even more, making it less painful to run through while going backwards in thin corridors. But unfortunately, this version came with a lot of bugs, and I mean a lot of bugs. This version was known for being very broken, as it was unintentionally coded in the beta version of the game, meaning that the game was missing many things from it that were supposed to be in there, like Whiteface's chase in Endless Mode and Specimen 5's death scene. But thankfully, just 6 months later, on April 5th, 2021, Akira updated the game one final time, and the game is now what it is today. This would be the final version of the original game, version 4.0. The OG era has officially come to an end, as it no longer will receive any more updates, which is quite unfortunate. But it is bittersweet that the game got so much attention and was able to bring forth an HD version of the game, which in recent years has made it to several gaming consoles, including the PS4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox. And that just about wraps up the evolution of Spooky's Jumpscare Mansion. Exactly 10 years have passed since its first release, and it's still loved by so many. The game has changed so many lives for the better, including mine. This free indie horror game from 2014 might be 10 years old now, but its legacy will live on forever, and Spooky will always have a place in our hearts. Happy anniversary, Spooky. You'll always be cute to us.
Thank you for watching, Recruit. See you later.